I think because they're easy to find, they're easy to take care of, they're not scary at all. They're a big enough animal where they're not going to be delicate for even a child to hold, the golden retriever of lizards. If you're a parent, first of all, it is your responsibility. Even if you buy, little Billy, a bearded dragon for his 8th birthday, that is your pet. Little Billy's going to go to school, going to go away to school, probably to university or college in 10 years. That animal is going to be not even half cooked at that point, right? These animals can live 20 plus years.
Most people think of reptiles as simple pets. They don't wag their tails, they don't greet you at the door, and they don't demand a lot of attention. But over the last decade, our understanding of reptile welfare has changed dramatically, and many of the things once considered normal are now being questioned. Today I'm joined by Adam Wickens, one of the most influential voices in reptile education, whose content has helped millions of people better understand bearded dragons, reptile behavior, husbandry, and welfare. And in this conversation, we're going to talk about what reptiles actually need, the biggest myths in reptile keeping, and whether we're finally moving from keeping reptiles alive to helping them thrive. Let's get going. So it's great to have you on the podcast. And obviously you have a massive following. For those who don't know you yet, from my listeners, you are the creator of Wickens Wicked Reptiles, which is a very cool name, which is one of the largest reptile education platforms on YouTube. So well done. It's incredible. And I obviously encourage all my listeners to go and take a look. Yeah. But I wanted to talk to you specifically about bearded dragons today because they're often recommended as the perfect first reptile. And they're also species where owners can unknowingly get it really, really wrong and make those kind of significant mistakes without even realizing. So unlike dogs and cats, we know that they are bad at showing pain at times and displaying issues when they're sick. Reptiles are worse than that. So I'm hoping we can tackle some of the issues and have a discussion today to obviously just highlight some of those key things and make first-time ownership a breeze for those who are keen. So welcome.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for having me on, by the way.
That's cool. So before we get stuck into all my questions, I'm going to bombard you with loads today. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're obviously sitting in your own project, which looks like a phenomenal background there. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in dealing with reptiles.
Sure. So I got involved in reptiles about 20 years ago. I always wanted to have reptiles as a kid, but as is very common with kids, and I get this comment all the time on YouTube, my mom won't let me have a snake or a reptile. So eventually I got one when I was old enough to, and I just kind of ran with it ever since. And then I started a YouTube channel in 2019, and then it became my job about 2 years after that. So now if you ask me when I was 8 years old what I want to do for a living, it is exactly this. So I couldn't be happier. Everything's great with the whole reptile world.
Living the dream, hey?
I am.
So why do you think bearded dragons have become the golden retrievers of the reptile world?
I think because they're easy to find, they're easy to take care of, they're not scary at all. They're a big enough animal where they're not going to be delicate for even a child to hold. I mean, it's a pretty robust animal. Like, this is a robust animal in comparison to something like a crested gecko or a leopard gecko, or even like a corn snake, where you can manipulate that body much easier than something like this. And because they're so easy or perceived to be easy, especially taking care from before the early 2000s, where people would put them in 40-gallon enclosures and not give them UVB and all of this, in the same way that red ear sliders are easy according to other people, and that's why they become so popular. So I just think the perception that they're not scary and the perception that they're really easy to keep, that would be why they're so common, or the golden retriever of lizards.
So who have you got on your shoulder? Introduce us.
So this is Diamond. Diamond has been the host of the channel. I'm just the co-host. This is like the main guy right here of Wickens Wicked Reptiles since about 2019. So Diamond, earlier this week, we found a skin infection on him, which I've never seen in a bearded dragon before, ever. I've been keeping bearded dragons since 2008. But it's healing really, really well. So, I mean, Diamond's doing great. He's the champ.
Oh, he's gorgeous. Thank you so much for bringing him on. It's definitely lovely to be able to witness him. And yeah, I've seen him on your channel, so it's very cool that I get the personal introduction. So thank you. But back to my questions, because I can easily get distracted by him on your shoulder. It's so lovely. If someone has never owned a reptile before, what is it about beardies that make them just so easy to fall in love with?
Well, because they have these cute little personalities and they look adorable and they're not flighty. And I think that's the thing with a lot of reptiles, especially with people who aren't reptile people yet. Which, and I say yet because you get one reptile and then it turns into three or four. That's just how it is. You become a person of reptiles. But if you're not yet and you're used to like dogs, cats, I don't know, hamsters, whatever, these animals are not flighty. Like you see how he just moved, right? He will probably not move again the entire episode. And it's warm in
Yeah.
here. It is eight. Well, I guess you're South Africa, right? So you can do Celsius. It is 25 degrees Celsius in here. And so it's perfectly temperatured for him. He's not too cold. He just won't move. And that's just what I think people love about bearded dragons. Whereas if you get a corn snake or some other tiny lizard, they're going to be scurrying all over the place. And it's like work to hold on to them. Where I can concentrate talking to you and I don't have to worry about what Diamond's doing. I know he's going to be totally fine.
So, I mean, obviously, they recommend it as first-time good pets for as reptiles. Is that something we tell ourselves because they're so popular, or are they truly good first-time pets?
Both. And when I first started the channel, I would actually argue that they weren't good first time pets. But I think first time pet is determined based on the first time keeper. And first time keepers now are more informed than they were even 7 years ago when I started the channel, where there wasn't really as much on YouTube and there wasn't podcasts like yours and there wasn't all these articles that you can read. Where now I think everybody realizes, okay, 120 gallons is standard. This is how we do things. You have to change the UVB. And even the first time keepers understand that. So I changed my mind. I do think they're good first time animals. And I think that's not just because they're popular, but because once you have those things that used to be barriers to entry in place, which really aren't that difficult to do, they are really, really easy to take care of.
So how long's the investment in terms of, we understand that a lot of young children, as you made mention, you were begging for a reptile when you were younger. And often it's the parents, and I understand that you're a parent too, who end up with this investment. And we need to understand from how long do they live, and what separates the ones that make it to that ripe old age from those that don't?
Well, and that's a great question. And if you're a parent, first of all, it is your responsibility. Even if you buy, little Billy, a bearded dragon for his 8th birthday, that is your pet. And it's going to be because little Billy is going to go to school, going to go away to school, probably to university or college in 10 years, if they're 8 when they get it. And that animal is going to be not even half cooked at that point, right? These animals can live 20 plus years. Diamond here, I don't know exactly how old he is because I got him, it was kind of a rescue situation, but I'm guessing he's between 10 and 12 years old. And my other bearded dragons both live till past 12 too. And I've seen bearded dragons live over 20 years. So it is truly an investment. Not as big as something like a parrot or a tortoise, but at the same time, this isn't, a Great Dane that's going to have a lifespan of 8 or 10 years if they're lucky. This animal should be expected to live 20 plus years.
That is crazy. And 20 plus years, obviously, I don't think people often realize that a cat and dog don't necessarily get to that age. And so it truly is a commitment.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, some dogs will make it. I got a 15-year-old Pomeranian upstairs who will never die, by the way. He's a magical being who I could never imagine passing away. But he's a 15-year-old dog who runs great. And then there's other dogs when they're just, they're 5 or 6 and then something happens and then they just pass away. And with bearded dragons or with any reptile, it's the same. Same thing with humans. Sometimes your lifespan just isn't as long as it should be because of an ailment or whatever. And I know we're going to touch on it later, but with bearded dragons, I mean, this animal could be full of cancer and you would never know it until it's too late.
Yeah. I can't wait to deep dive into that. One of the things you've spoken about quite a lot is the difference between surviving and thriving. Can you explain that distinction?
Well, I think it's a big distinction. I think there's a big difference between an animal really getting on, and I think that to compare it to humans, if you're somebody who is very comfortable in their career and comfortable in their family and you have a nice house and you come home and everything's great, then you're thriving. But if you're someone who maybe you're just out of college and you're barely making ends meet, like you're just surviving, right? And you're working towards that. The thing with reptiles is they can't work towards anything. It's you as the owner who is going to make them thrive or survive. And an animal that is exhibiting natural behaviors, an animal that's in a big enclosure that can move around is going to be thriving. But if you're giving an animal a 20-gallon enclosure where they can barely turn around and they can touch all the sides, not the right temperatures, no, the basking spot isn't right, the humidity isn't right, there's no UVB, you're feeding them the exact same diet, they're getting skinny and then they're getting fat and then they're just kind of yo-yo. That is an animal that's surviving. And I think we see less of that now, which is great But we used to see that all the time. And I'm glad we're moving towards thriving as kind of the commonplace.
So what kind of welfare issues do you see every day that owners simply don't recognize?
Well, it depends on the species, but for bearded dragons specifically, I mean, the weight thing is a big thing where a lot of owners they'll see, like this chunky animal on TikTok or whatever, and they think it's adorable, but that animal has fatty liver or whatever and is slowly dying, or animals that just aren't fed enough or just don't have the right diet, and then they let's suppose that you forget to give them calcium for a month. I've seen that happen, and then all of a sudden they've got metabolic bone disease, and I think that until it's too late, you're really not going to notice these things. Animals can have bones basically disintegrate inside of them before you notice that there's a limp. And by that point, it's either amputation or euthanasia. And generally, people aren't going to be spending thousands of dollars on a bearded dragon that costs $100, which is not great. I know that you might not like to hear that, but that is kind of the reality.
No, absolutely. It is a reality. I mean, we see it in our small guinea pigs and rabbits. We've got the same discussion. Well, I bought it from the pet store for X. It's crazy. I'm not kind of spending that amount on, So yes, rather avoid it. So, and we're going to discuss, ways in which to do that. But if someone brought home a bearded dragon tomorrow, what are the absolute non-negotiables that they have to get right? Can you just give us the list? I know we're going to tackle each of them in turn.
Sure. So you have to have the enclosure already set up. If the question is when you bring them home, what is not negotiable, the enclosure has to be set up and cycled, and you know what the hotspot is, and you know what the cool end is, and you have to have it set up for the animal rather than have it in a box for a day and a half, and then the light broke, and then it becomes a problem where maybe the light or the setting up doesn't happen for 2 days. The other thing is making sure that all of those things are perfect, making sure that you know what the basking spot and the humidity and how those things fluctuate in your house. The video I have coming up this week actually kind of tackles that. But having everything ready for your bearded dragon before you get it home, I think is non-negotiable. You have to have that.
You look at me, I look at you, I see the love in your eyes.
Health you can see, love you can feel. UltraPet, the science of love.
So the enclosure debate has become quite a huge topic, and I know that you tackle this and you probably have a lot of questions around this, but why has enclosure size become so controversial?
I think it's been controversial because nobody can agree, and nobody really understands why we offer that recommendation in the first place. If you go to Australia and you find a bearded dragon, I promise you they're not sitting in a 20-gallon, 120-gallon, 3,000-gallon enclosure. They're out in the open. So what is the minimum, and how do we even come to that? And honestly, I don't even really know the answer other than a little bit of common sense. How much does that animal move? How big of an area do you need to have a gradient that's good for temperature and humidity? And I think that people don't really realize that. People just read something and then think, okay, well, that's it. Or they watch their favorite influencer on a video 7 years ago say something, and something has changed in those 7 years, and they just gravitate and stick onto it. So I think that nobody really knows why we pick the enclosure size in the first place. So then it's really hard to get right. And I think that's why there's such a debate.
Absolutely. And I mean, obviously there's quite an expense, and there's a huge amount, as you say, in terms involved in the setup. One of the things, obviously, the difference you made mention of the leopard geckos and the distinction between bearded dragons and leopard geckos is the UVB lighting. Before we tackle that, can you tell us, including the UVB, what does an ideal bearded dragon enclosure actually look like? I mean, you've got some beautiful enclosures behind you. What should it have in its setup?
Sure. So if I were to make the ideal bearded dragon enclosure setup, it'd be a 120-gallon enclosure. So it's 4 feet long, 2 feet deep, 2 feet high. On top of it, UVB light. It's either a 10.0, 12, or 14.0. There's a bunch of companies that make those now. They're literally called dragon lamps for bearded dragons. And then a heat lamp or a bank of heat lamps so that you can get your basking spot to the temperature that you need. That basking spot is going to be made of slate, brick, something that holds on to heat. Naturalistic substrate, some logs to climb, water bowl on the cool side so it's not evaporating, and that's it. Wham, bam, Bob's your uncle. That's all you need to make a happy bearded dragon.
You make it sound so easy. But what are some of the common temperature and heating mistakes that you see? Because you must see the issues associated with people getting this wrong. So what are the common issues, particularly in terms of that heating?
Sure. So people don't really take into account the ambience in their house. So, for example, I just filmed a video about a ball python enclosure, and I did this on purpose on a blank wall. And on that wall, there's like a heat register, right? So like a vent right on top. Well, guess what? Half the year, that's going to be air conditioning come out of that vent into that enclosure, because it's right below it. And some people don't have the option, right? They have one spot in their house where it fits, and that's where it's going to fit. And the other part of the year, it's going to be heat coming out. So you have to take into account that even though you have the heating right today in the enclosure, you have to monitor it because the temperature in your house is going to change, the humidity in your house is going to change, and maybe the airflow in your house, if you have a window open or a register open or whatever, is going to change too. So people just think, okay, well, everything is inside this box. Well, no, the box is inside your box, inside your enclosure, which is your house or your apartment. So I think people need to take that into consideration. And I very rarely see that on any video or any forum.
That makes total sense when you explain it like that. Obviously, I mean, we go through summers and winters, which are very different. And then people just rely on the fact that temperature is going to be controlled and managed within that environment. So it's so true. But let's talk substrate. Substrate is another one of those. I know we're having, conversations about the things that confuse people, but what do you use? What do you avoid? And why is there so much debate around it?
Well, there's such a debate because for some reason this thing was perpetuated that if you give the animal loose substrate, they'll become impacted. Okay, I asked the biggest emergency veterinarian in this country who sees exotics, how many bearded dragons have you ever seen impacted ever? He says, adults? I said, yes. He said, zero, ever in 10 years. So I think that there's this thing where people say, oh, well, they'll become impacted. That's really not going to happen. In the wild, if you use like a builder sand that's meant to clump together, like underneath patio stones, okay, that's something else. But if you use a naturalistic substrate like what I use, topsoil, dried out coconut core, and play sand, you're going to be fine. In the wild, where you go, it is like concrete some places and then loose sand other places, and they're eating bugs and sticks are getting in their mouth. Like there are no paper towel floors in the wilds of Australia. Trust me, I've been there, I've seen it. There just doesn't exist. And I think that people are just so risk adverse, which, okay, that's fine. But if you want to give a naturalistic substrate, it can't be a sterile substrate too.
So you've got to be careful where you source this stuff from as well.
Yes, definitely be careful. And that's why I pound into people. It's play sand. Buy play sand because it's round granules. If you put it in your hand, it'll fall right out. If you buy like a builder's substrate, like a builder's sand, you hold it together, it's triangular, so it binds together, which is what it's made for. So just be careful where you source it. And of course, just don't go out to the bush and just get a whole bunch of substrate because you don't know what's in that. But you can buy a bag of play sand and a bag of topsoil and a bag of coconut core for $15, and that's going to last you the entire year if you change it every 3 months.
So let's, before we get off that, let's talk about how you manage that, because do you spot clean? You're saying, do you completely change that in terms of the substrate? I'm asking you multiple questions at once, sorry, because this is so important. Obviously, even just as a leopard gecko owner via my son, you always want to know sort of when is the time to do the big clean? Is it something that you should be doing more if you've obviously got multiple animals? But also in terms of the distribution of that substrate, should you be offering multiple different sources, or do you choose one and that becomes the substrate of choice?
So for me, because I've done that, and I'm lucky because I get to make these videos for a living, right? So this is what I do. But so I've made, 15 care guides of like making different substrates. So the mix that works for me is equal parts, coconut core, play sand, and topsoil. And I just mix it, and I don't do like a certain ratio. So if it's like 20 or 30, this, that, it doesn't matter. Just kind of like get it sort of even. And the reason that I think that works really well is because it's easy to spot clean, which is the answer. You want to spot clean your enclosure. When you see an animal poop, clean it up. Now, if you want to do a bioactive substrate, that's a different debate, in which case I would say you never change the substrate ever, as long as you have a healthy cleanup crew. And then even if you don't spot clean, it just disappears anyway. I still recommend spot cleaning, just keeps things a lot cleaner. But if you don't have a naturalistic enclosure that has a cleanup crew and that is bioactive with plants, then I would recommend every 3 to 6 months. I mean, you just use your nose. Stick your nose in there. Does it smell like play sand and coconut core? Does it smell like feces? That's kind of like your indicator.
Mm. And water, obviously access to water you were saying is really important, particularly placement within the enclosure. Why is it that they need access to water when they're receiving fresh food?
People are going to like that I say this, but I don't think they even need water. I mean, The only reason that I give water in my enclosures, honestly, like the only reason I give standing water for my bearded dragons is because if I don't on the internet, I will get roasted in the comment section. That's it. In nature, they don't ever
Okay.
really drink for standing water. They will get the water from the dew, or rain on their food or on plants, and that's how they would get it. Very similar to a leopard gecko, crested gecko, chameleon, you name it, or from the actual matter that they're eating because they're eating a lot of plant matter. So in the wild, you're not really going to find a bearded dragon drinking standing water. Probably not. Maybe after a long drought and all of a sudden it rains. But I recommend that you give them water because if you mess up, if you don't give them the right amount of greens or you forget, or if you forget to miss the enclosure or the humidity isn't right in a humid section of the enclosure, then they will need to drink that standing water. So in the perfect world, in the perfect setup, they'll probably never touch it, but it's good to have just in case. And it doesn't really hurt the enclosure as long as you're giving them a shallow water bowl and you're not putting it on the warm side where it's going to spike the humidity.
So how do you manage the humidity? I'm very naive when it comes to reptiles, so I ask questions for my own interest. But
Sure.
having water in the enclosure, does that contribute to some of the humidity, or do you not rely on that water source and it's got to come from another source?
No, so humidity definitely is impacted by water. So think of it this way: like if you live in a region where there's a big giant lake, you're going to have more humidity on hot days than someone who doesn't have that lake there. And it's the same thing with reptiles, or with your reptile enclosure rather, where it's like kind of like a mini ecosystem. So if you have a water bowl on the warm side underneath a basking ball, that water is going to be evaporating all day, and it's going to spike the humidity, even if it's only a little bit. The big thing is, what's the humidity like in your house? I live really close to Niagara Falls, so it is 90% humidity here a lot of the time. The way that I get around that and produce 30 to 40% humidity for my bearded dragon is I just use a basking bulb. That's it. Because a basking bulb is going to fry that water rather. And because you have a screen top on that enclosure, the humidity that's evaporating will evaporate out of the cage rather than stick in it. Where if I had if I had a ball python, for example, I want humidity to be higher. So I will put like a silicone mat or something on the top. So all the humidity that evaporates, all the water that evaporates will go back into the enclosure. So it's just a matter of managing it. So screen top and then hot basking bulb, and that's going to zap all the humidity out of the air.
I get it. So, but what is the issue of getting it wrong? What happens if you've got the humidity too high or too low?
Respiratory infections most of the time. Now, bearded dragons actually can deal with a lot more humidity than we think. There's a lot more study going on in Australia, and you go to places where you find them in these burrows where it's 80% humidity, and they're there almost every day for a certain part of the season. Or they'll be in a place where it's 60 or 70 or 80% humidity during the daytime during certain parts where there's monsoons and things like that. So I think that I should mention they can definitely deal with higher humidity, but if you have them at 80% humidity all the time and there's no breaks from it, they're generally going to get an upper respiratory infection, which means bubbling at the nose, bubbling at the mouth, wheezing, gasping, gaping their mouth, and that is going to need medical intervention right away.
I totally get it. So obviously, I'm not going to completely move off the topic of husbandry because I think it impacts everything, as you made mention, even in terms of the diseases that we see as veterinarians. But I want to just move a little bit off that topic and ask, can you keep multiple bearded dragons together, or should they be like Diamond, just with one in an enclosure?
Oh, you're trying to get me in trouble now. Okay, so my opinion on this is that you could keep multiple females together if you had a really big enclosure. However, people demonize cohabitation. It is one of the biggest topics. It was the biggest thorn in my side for a long time was talking about cohabitation. So I think that if you're a new keeper, for sure, just one, period. If you have a regular size enclosure, it's 120 gallons, one, period. If you have a big giant enclosure and you have two females of equal size and equal age right around there, I think you could do it. And that's why you see it happen at zoos all the time, and it works out great. But I would recommend, as a general rule, especially to see people who maybe aren't initiated or they're brand new, one at a time. And never males together, by the way, ever. Males will rip each other apart.
So explain to us why cohabitation can become an issue.
Well, it can become an issue. It's the same thing with humans, right? I like to liken it with humans or dogs, right? Dogs are pack animals. No one is going to argue that. But sometimes you get two dogs who don't like each other at the dog park, and they just try to rip each other apart. But we can't say because we've seen that happen then dogs aren't pack animals anymore. It's ridiculous. But I think that cohabitation becomes this big hot button issue because this animal is solitary and never wants to be around other animals, where that sometimes isn't true. And what can happen with cohabitation is the same with the dog analogy, where you get two females that don't like each other, or maybe it's improper setup and they're just in a bad mood generally, or it's a too small of a setup, or one of the females is much bigger and stronger than the other one, or there's resource fighting, so they're fighting over a hot spot, or they're fighting over food. Then you're going to get issues, even if it's two females, which generally could be placid together.
So, okay, we're going to assume that as a new reptile owner, I've just taken on my new pet. What are we feeding them, especially if we get them young versus as adults?
This is a great question because a lot of people don't talk about this. Smaller or younger animals, especially with bearded dragons, will have a different diet. So a younger bearded dragon needs to eat about 70% protein matter, so like crickets, dubias, things like that. And then the other 30% is going to be greens. As they get older, it switches. So, halfway through halfway through their adolescence or whatever, like a year in, it'll be 50-50. And then after that, when they're adults, you want about 70% to be greens and vegetation, and then 30% to be insects. So it does change, and I think that people don't really do the change, and then their bearded dragon will either be stunted or not grow as fast. And then as adults, too much protein isn't really good for their insides.
And how do you go about feeding them? Is this a daily exercise? How frequently are we feeding them, and in what manner?
So the manner, I think that I get this question a lot, how many insects, and they're trying to do a math equation. The way that I do it is I feed them diamond insects 3 times a week as an adult. As babies, you'd want to do every single day. Some people even do twice a day, but as an adult bearded dragon, which is the majority of their life that you'll have them, I feed about 3 times a week insects. You can even do 2 times a week insects. And then I just literally dump in some crickets or whatever and just let him go crazy. And I give him enough where he'll eat them all in about 15 minutes. You don't want them lingering around and then bugging them at night. So just don't put too many in at a time. And that's kind of it. That's the whole idea. I don't have like a feeding cup or a feeding dish. For the greens, I'll just take like a plastic container or something where the sand isn't getting into it. Because although I don't worry about impaction, it's probably just not nice for them to have sand in their mouth, I would imagine. I don't like it. So I assume they don't either. So you just put something clean and then put their salad on top of it, and then that's it.
That's great. And are there any strict rules around handling them when they're eating?
I don't think so. With a snake, you'd want to worry about like regurgitation, but with lizards in general, but bearded dragons, they eat much smaller chunks, right? They're not eating a whole rat that's like 20% of their weight. So I would just give them a while just because it's uncomfortable. Like, would you want your uncle to come up and give you a great big hug after Thanksgiving dinner? Probably not, right? So I think the same thing with bearded dragons. Just kind of treat them like, let them digest a little bit. They want to go to their hot spot, and also make sure that they can get to the hot spot. I know you didn't ask me this, but I'll just put this in anyway. If you feed your bearded dragon or any animal that is diurnal too late in the day, what can happen is that matter, especially if it's plant matter, can just rot in their stomach, and then you're going to have issues. So make sure that they can get to a heat source right after they eat. But if you want to handle them an hour or two later, go for it.
That's great advice and really important. That's not something I would have thought of in terms of the timing in the day. What husbandry advice do you wish would just disappear?
Oh man, hot rocks. So there's these products, and they're like a rock basically that plugs into the wall. They'll burn the crap out of your animal because the animal doesn't feel the heat on their belly. And this is the thing with monitors, especially where you get a big animal and you have one light on it. Sometimes they'll just sit there and roast, and you can smell the flesh burning because their head isn't getting to temperature. They don't realize their back is burning. So this is an example with monitors because they're bigger. But with any animal, the belly heat, they don't really feel that they're getting burnt. So they're not registering that they're literally cooking from the inside. So those need to go away forever, those hot rocks. And for the most part, they have. Too small of enclosures. Well, I can't afford a 120-gallon enclosure. Well, then you can't afford a bearded dragon. Sorry, you just can't. And then feeding the exact same diet and no variation at all for an animal like a bearded dragon that is an omnivore and does get lots and lots of variation, especially throughout the year in the wild. I think those 3 things we just need to do away with.
No, totally. Is there something that pet stores are still telling people that drives you absolutely crazy?
Yeah. Put them in a 40-gallon enclosure and they'll be fine and upgrade later. Like, stop doing that, especially if it's a juvenile that's going to be 2 size in 6 months. Don't sell somebody this glass enclosure And then they're going to need to upgrade to another $300 enclosure in 6 months. They're not going to do it. And you know that. You're selling them an animal, it's $50. Like they're not going to spend 6 times the amount on a new cage in 6 months. So I think that, and also getting animals for children. Like people who walk into a pet store and they're like 16 and they got their first paycheck and they walk in, it's like, don't sell this person a reptile. Like just don't. And I know it's kind of gatekeepy, but that 16-year-old isn't going to care about that bearded dragon that cost them $50 in 6 months. They just probably won't. And they have no adult supervision that you can see because they're in the store by themselves. So I think and this is especially true at reptile expos. So I think we need to just do a little bit more due diligence before we sell anybody any animal. We can't treat them like disposable things just because they don't cost a lot of money.
Totally agree. So let's talk about some of the fun stuff. Are bearded dragons genuinely cute? Do they have personalities or their own special traits? Or are we just as humans projecting human traits onto them?
Well, we personify everything. It's just what we do as humans, right? Like we imagine what our dog would sound like and what they say. And those are animals that actually do have a personality in the way that they can't actually love you. Like I do believe that my dogs genuinely love me. Your bearded dragon's never going to love you. I mean, you're not going to have, you can have a bond with your bearded dragon, but it's mostly going to be in your head. And because they're such a placid animal like this, most people would see this and be like, oh, your bearded dragon loves you. Like, not really. He's just kind of tired. It's early in the day. It was 8 a.m. here. The lights literally turned on right before we did this episode. He's just not awake yet. That's it. But if it was feeding time and there was crickets, he'd be gone. Like, so I think that we do personify reptiles a lot. But with bearded dragons and things like that, you can have a bond, but the bond is probably one way, and that's okay because you're not going to feel like they don't like you because they're not going to be trying to squirm away from you.
So can they actually recognize you? Do they recognize their owners?
Bearded dragons, no. There are reptiles out there, like my blue tree monitors at the back. You walk in and they know it's you, or they know it's my wife, or they know it's somebody else for sure. There's monitor species are incredibly intelligent where they can walk in, they understand routines, they understand times of day, they understand keepers, but bearded dragons, I just did a video, the reptile intelligence list, and bearded dragons were D tier. They're not the brightest candles in the box for sure. But I mean, they're beautiful and I love them. I'm not saying anything rude. Sorry, Diamonds. But yeah, they don't recognize their own. They don't know the difference between you and, whoever else.
So what sort of behaviors do they display that people particularly enjoy? And what are ones that you can say are just not normal and you should be concerned about?
So people like when their female bearded dragons are waving all the time. So it's kind of like this motion right here, where it's cute, but it's a submissive movement. That's what it is. It means that they're either bowing, like backing down to another bigger female that they don't want to fight with, or it's a mating behavior. And your bearded dragon doesn't want to mate with you, no matter how good looking you are, I promise. So it's definitely a submissive behavior. And this is probably something you don't want to see. Male head bobbing. Why are they head bobbing? Generally, that means that they're either in the mood to breed, or they're with another male. So, for example, I've had Diamond across this room was much different, and there was a banded iguana in the corner of the room, and they would see each other, and the banded iguana would do his threat display, and then Diamond would head bob. So you want to make sure that you don't see that. So if you've got multiple animals, especially if they're male lizards, keep them separated visually so they can't see each other. But other than that, if your bearded dragon is never moving, it's probably too cold in your enclosure or they're sick. They should at least move sometimes during the day. They are kind of potatoes. They are kind of lazy. But, I mean, you should see some sort of movement. And people who don't, generally, it's because their hotspot isn't warm enough and their bearded dragon is kind of like fighting for their life and they're freezing. That's kind of what it is.
Do they get bored? Do they display boredom?
Maybe. I mean, I think that might be part of it too, where if they're very sedentary, like they're just got nothing to do. And if you have an enclosure, I recommend moving things around. So I think that they could be bored, but again, they're not a blue tree monitor where you need to move things around and give them puzzles to get their insects. So it's possible, but I wouldn't really put too much thought into that if you're a bearded dragon owner.
So let's talk handling. Do they generally enjoy being handled, or do we sometimes mistake tolerance for enjoyment?
They tolerate it. And I think that maybe they enjoy it if, like, for example, it's probably 75 degrees in the other, so probably 20 degrees in the other room, where he wants to be 25, 30 degrees, right? So with me, like my body temperature is going to be higher than it is over there. So maybe he's happy to be handled by me right now because I'm acting kind of like a warm surface. But in terms of playing with me the way that a dog would want to play with me. It's not like that, and you can't compare it. So it's more tolerance than anything. But of all the animals, they don't get stressed out, and that's important. If you bring out a chameleon and hold it, that's going to be a stressful experience for that animal. I don't recommend handling chameleons for basically any reason. But with bearded dragons, you don't have to worry about it stressing them. So maybe they're not going to love it like a dog. It's not going to be the highlight of their day, but they're not going to be stressed about it. And I think it's perfectly fine to handle your animal and do that guilt free.
Are you happy to demonstrate the correct way to handle a bearded dragon and the kind of things, particularly when you are trying to teach children? And I know that, there is a very strict conversation about young children not taking primary care of these animals, but how would you introduce sort of the correct handling behavior with young children?
Sure. So both hands, make sure that the animal is being supported. So like just for a demonstration, don't be like, you can. He'll just move himself up so he's comfortable. But if for a child, I would say both hands. Make sure that you're not putting your fingers in front of his mouth. Although a bearded dragon biting you, you'd have a better chance of being struck by lightning most of the time. And then for the tail, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But just make sure the animal is comfortable. And that's why when I put him on my shoulder, first of all, they're semi-arboreal animals, so this is a natural behavior to be up high. But he's on my entire shoulder, where I'm not just holding him like one-handed. But also, I would say don't overthink it. With a leopard gecko or a crested gecko, they're very fragile. These aren't fragile animals. Just make sure that you're not dropping the animal. So if you hand it to a child, put them on the floor. Just make sure that they're seated, and they'll be totally fine. But this is an animal that is a pleasurable experience, and you don't have to feel too antsy about dropping the animal as long as you're not prone to dropping things. This isn't an animal that you're going to hurt very easily just by manipulating it the wrong way.
What are the sort of things that bearded dragons do that make people panic unnecessarily?
I mean, that's really hard to answer because I can't think of anything that they do to pay. I mean, if
don't.
Yeah, this is kind of what you get. This is kind of what you get with them. If they're sick, like if they're exhibiting behavior when they're sick, that might make people panic, or the head bobbing of adults. So if adults are head bobbing, that can seem aggressive, even though it's adorable because they're, cute. But otherwise, I would just say, like, for example, when Diamond appeared to have this wound on him earlier in the week, that made me freak out a bit because I've never seen that before. And I love this animal. And now it's healing great, which is fine. But an owner that's not used to going to an exotic vet, that might make them freak out. Or an animal that is gasping or gaping. That's another thing. That's a good example. Sometimes what bearded dragons do to regulate is their mouth will be open. So they'll be gaping their mouth. And all they're doing is just regulating heat. And almost all lizards do this. My iguana outside does this too. And people think that they're struggling to breathe. All they're doing is just opening their mouth to allow air to escape. And they're just regulating their body temperature because just like dogs, they don't sweat. So that's how they do it.
So you made mention, obviously, of Diamond's skin. Shedding seems to worry a lot of owners. What is normal and what is not when it comes to shedding?
So with bearded dragons, you don't want to. A lot of people will conflate them with other animals, where a snake, like a ball python, you want a full, complete shed. Lizards don't shed like that. Lizards also, you don't want to spike the humidity too much because they want to flake off their skin. So if they're big, the big belly skin is coming out and it's one big piece, but then they have little tiny flecks off of their back, that's completely normal. If their hands are holding on to the skin, that is not normal. And sometimes that can happen, especially with a growing bearded dragon, where it'll kind of start to become like a tourniquet around either their entire hand or around their fingers. And you see this in a lot of like Ackie monitors. You see this all the time, where some Ackie monitors will have no fingers at all because of this. Bearded dragons, it's not as common, but I've seen it before, where they'll just be missing fingers, or they'll lose the circulation in their hand and then their hand just comes off. This is rare, but make sure that if you do see like a glove basically of skin and it's there for a couple days, help them get it off. Otherwise it will become a tourniquet and they will lose blood supply, and nothing good happens from that.
And what is the best way to assist getting it off?
You can use like a wet cloth, like a warm wet cloth, or soak them. Now, people will say don't do this because with bearded dragons, they're a lower humidity animal. But if you're doing this for 10 minutes, where it's lukewarm water, say 35-degree or 30-degree water, something like that, and then you put a lid on top of it, make sure it has air holes so they can breathe, and it's going to loosen up all of their skin, and their skin is just going to start coming off. And you can just kind of help with their hands. Like imagine a bearded dragon paw, whatever, and just kind of like this motion here, and the skin will just roll off basically like a glove.
So let's talk some of the health problems. What are the biggest preventable health problems that you see in bearded dragons?
Malnutrition and metabolic bone disease are big ones. So, metabolic bone disease is something that happens when the animal can't synthesize calcium and their bones just kind of disintegrate or malform. And you see this a lot. So, somebody will get a bearded dragon setup guide and they'll get their UVB light and then they'll just never change it because the light is still producing light. So, they don't know that you need to change every 6 months to a year, depending on the manufacturer. And then 2 years goes by, and then all of a sudden their spine is all kinked and they got kinks in their tail and their jaw doesn't work normally. And that happens all the time. And then malnutrition is the other one where people won't feed them the correct diet and won't supplement them correctly. And then all of a sudden they either have a really obese animal that's going to have a really shortened lifespan or a really skinny animal. And they just can't figure out how to get them to eat. And those are the two big ones.
So let's open up that a little bit further in terms of supplementation, particularly obviously with vitamins and calcium. What is your advice in terms of managing and preventing those conditions?
So my advice is always to get more than just what I say, right? I'm a dumb bald guy in my basement, I always say. So like consult a veterinarian for you. But what I do, this is what I do, is every feeding, they get calcium without D3. Every other feeding, they get with D3. So it's just two different bottles. And then I give them a multivitamin once a week. And that's it. So it doesn't have to be difficult. It's not expensive. These calcium things are like $5 or $6 that you can get. Multivitamin will last you almost the entire year. It costs like $10. So your entire supplementation for the whole year is going to cost you less than $20. So it's really, really easy to do. But again, I recommend doing lots of, not experimenting, but lots of reading and maybe talking to other keepers, because if you do it wrong and you give too much calcium or too much D3, especially with a really good UVB source, then they can get things like gout and things like that. So this is kind of like a hot topic and one of those things you should do a lot of research on as an individual trying to keep these animals.
It's not sounding as straightforward as the starter pet we started the conversation about. Definitely.
I would say that is if you're following the right advice on how to set up your enclosure, what I just mentioned is great. If all of a sudden your UVB drops off and they don't have the right, enclosure setup, that's when it gets difficult, right? It's like me saying to you, make sure that you fill your car with this type of gas. Well, if you never get an oil change for a year, well, that's going to change things, right? So I think it's just that as long as you're doing everything else correctly, super straightforward. Calcium every feeding, every other is D3, and once a week is multivitamin. That's it.
Great advice. So, obviously we're talking husbandry and enclosure. How important is ventilation? Why do they get respiratory issues? And, sort of how are you managing these other than referring them to veterinarians for treatment? But what is the best in terms of avoiding it?
So they're really robust animals. So, you really have to mess up for them to have a respiratory infection in the first place. But the reason that it would happen is stagnant air that is too wet. That's kind of it. So if you have a PVC enclosure that doesn't have a screen top or doesn't have good ventilation in the sides, then you're not going to have moving air. The air is going to become stale and stagnant, and that is what's going to give them respiratory infections. So to prevent that, just make sure you have the right enclosure. And that's kind of it. You're going to be opening the enclosure all the time anyway to feed them, because you're going to be feeding them several times a week, or if they're babies, every single day. But I would recommend good ventilation in the enclosure, and then you really never have to worry about it. I personally have never had a bearded dragon with a respiratory infection, but also I've always set up bearded dragons correctly with airflow.
So we spoke about injuries, and obviously burns are one of them. What are the other injuries that you typically see when either they've been set up incorrectly or with the wrong kind of owners? What are the kind of injuries that they are prone to?
I don't know if you consider it an injury, but the metabolic bone disease that we talked about, that's like the main thing that I see with bearded dragons. But otherwise, owners don't set them up too high, so you don't see fall damage. And even if that was a thing where you give them tall enclosures, they're robust. Burns, maybe if you were to give them a heat rock or if you were to give them a basking spot that is way too close. So for example, the way that you want to set up a basking spot is you want to measure what the surface temperature is. So if you give them a log, let's say, and then you give them a basking light on the top, 100 watt, 150 watt, whatever, you want to take a heat gun, or I don't know what you'd call it, but it's like a laser basically that measures the temperature of the surface, not the air temperature. And if you have that too close to the light, just like if you were to put your hand really close to a light bulb, it's going to burn. So you want to make sure that the log or brick or whatever it is that their basking spot is the appropriate length or distance from that bulb. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It's simply put your hand there. Is your hand burning or not? But make sure that you have one of those probe guns, which you can buy for $25 at a hardware store, and it'll last you forever. Mine's 10 years old, never had a problem. Change the battery once every 10 years, and that's it. So those are the main things, but those are really easily avoidable. There aren't any things that there's no reason that your animal should have an injury. A sickness is a different thing, but an injury, there's really no reason that you could ever expect that to happen.
No, I mean, we have seen a couple of cases of them being stood on, not that it's excusable, or sat on, obviously, if they're being handled.
Never even thought of that.
Which is, no. So I really am interested in this, and I'm asking you a little bit sort of hesitantly because there may be minimal risk, but what should owners, if anything, be concerned about in terms of zoonotic diseases, particularly when there are young children involved, and the whole, how can this be avoided?
I mean, just wash your hands after. You're no more likely to get salmonella from a bearded dragon than you are a dog. So, and I think that people freak out about that. Turtles is like the big one, but turtles, you're no more likely to get salmonella than a dog either. So as long as your kid is washing their hands after the fact, there's very few serious illnesses that can be transferred from a lizard, like a bearded dragon, to a human. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. I mean, if it's a parasite or something, but even then, there's so few of them. So maybe like a tick or something might be able to transfer. But why is there ticks in your house in the first place? That's the one that I hear all the time. But other than that, just wash your hands after the fact, and that's it. Like that is truly it. People freak out about, illnesses going from bearded dragons to humans, but it's really kind of a non-event.
No, that's great, because I think this is also something, particularly handling the food. I encourage all parents to get their kids to contribute in terms of feeding the dog or feeding the cat, because I think it's really important. And, one of the responsibilities, I said it to my son, well, if you're going to get reptiles, you need to, particularly when you're home and not at school, you need to feed them. So obviously a lot of conversation comes up about, particularly with snakes, as you made mention, that sort of hygiene associated with after feeding them. Is there anything that you can transmit to your bearded dragons unintentionally?
Not that I know of. I mean, also keep in mind, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a zoologist, so there might be something that I'm not thinking of. Excuse me, but I can't think of anything that you're going to give to your bearded dragon, unless you come in from outside, you have a tick on you and it crawls on your bearded dragon. This is just something that I've seen on Reddit recently for some reason, but I've never seen this actually happen ever before. But otherwise, you're not going to give your bearded dragon the common flu or cold or anything like that. Like if you got chicken pox, go ahead and handle your animal. You're going to be fine. I wouldn't worry too much about that. But again, just make sure that you're washing if you want to wash your hands before you handle your animal because you're afraid to do something like that, do that. But otherwise, the only thing that I ever say with humans and safety is wash your hands after you handle your animal. And if you want to before, do that too.
That's great advice. Adam, this has been a really, really cool conversation. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of other things that I haven't thought to ask you, but I mean, there are so many topics in reptile keeping that we should tackle. Is there anything else that you really feel strongly that bearded dragon owners should know that I haven't questioned you on?
Yeah, all of them should subscribe to Wickens Wicked Reptiles. Otherwise, your bearded dragon will spontaneously combust. Okay, I'm kidding. But for real, I would just recommend do the right thing. If you're going to get a bearded dragon, have everything set up first. Don't get a 40-gallon enclosure and then down the road, I need to upgrade, but I can't afford it. Have all your ducks in a row before you get your animal. Because guess what? That vet bill is going to cost you a heck of a lot more than setting up your animal correctly in the first place.
I agree. Hopefully our listeners will come away with better understanding that good reptile keeping isn't just about keeping them alive. It's about understanding their needs. And, obviously you definitely want any animal in your care to be thriving, not surviving. So this has been great. And there's been a lot that I've learned from this conversation. So I hope my listeners are taking the same away. Thank you. And I agree, there's phenomenal content and that you tackle topics in sort of deep dive into particular things, like you say, substrates, which is really, really helpful because I think, it's crazy when, you end up with a problem and you're just not even aware of it until someone informs you. And we're all trying to do the best thing for the animals in our care. So I'm very tempted to at some point let my son now have a bearded dragon, but obviously I know that that's going to be my pet. They're very cool.
It is going to be your pets.
Very chilled.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just recommend, if you don't know something, look it up. Don't make it up. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to watch videos and read forums. Whatever you know, if you don't know something, it's okay not to know. Just make sure that you learn it, and that's it.
Definitely. No, everyone, go and follow your page. You're on YouTube, you're on Instagram. Where else can they find you?
YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. That's kind of it. Don't come find me at my house. Otherwise, I'm everywhere. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me on. And
Thank you.
This was great. So I hope somebody learned something about bearded dragons today.
No, they definitely will. Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode on the Pause and Effect podcast. If you found the discussion helpful, please like, share, and follow our podcast. Don't forget to leave us a comment or review. We love hearing from our listeners. Remember, you can listen to us on your preferred podcast platform. Welcome back to Just for Pets. You're with Dr. Cara.
Hi, Doc. It's Jackson the Jack Rossi here, and boy, am I itchy.
Are you on a hypoallergenic diet?
Hyper what now?
Changing to a special diet will really help. And Just for Pets have a massive range. And flea and tick medication, special shampoo.
Ooh, how quick can I get some?
Order today and we'll deliver pronto.
I feel better already.
Justforpets.co.za. Vet approved, pet adored. Get it all to your door.